All right, good morning, everyone. All right, I hope you had a good day. All right, so far, okay, so what we're going to do today is just looking at the difference between Revit and Revit LT and how it would affect you and what's in the one software and what isn't in the other, that sort of thing. All right, so um, let's look at the agenda. Firstly, we're just going to look at the two different or the industry, and then we're going to delve down to the software, some of the differences between the different versions of Revit, how it's positioned in the industry, some options that you can look at, and then we'll look at an example and just go through and describe what you can look at and the different aspects that you need to just ask yourselves to see which of the two software will fit in your environment. All right, and then we'll conclude with some questions and that sort of thing. All right, so looking at the industry, obviously Revit fits into the building industry with the structural and the MEP and the architectural sub industries, as we call it. All right, so both software can be used in this industry. There are other softwares as well, AutoCAD, even SketchUp and other softwares out there as well. But mainly we'll focus on Revit and Revit LT in this specific industry. All right. Architects and engineers typically use the software, as I mentioned. Basically, if I look at particular architects, they will and architectural technologies, they'll use Revit or Revit LT to draw plan sections, elevations, perhaps create a little 3D view of the model, and perhaps later on, link to other stakeholders, but that comes later. But in the beginning, they'll basically just create the 3D model or the model of the building to create plans, elevations, and that sort of thing. The beauty of Revit is that if you make one change in the 3D model, all the 2Ds that's been generated from that 3D model will update, and that's the beauty of parametric-based software. All right. Electrical engineers, they also use Revit and to create their building services, be it lighting or electrical wiring, circuits, that sort of thing. And it allows them to add those services within the pre-designed architectural model. So what would happen is an architect would perhaps create this model, send it to the electrical or mechanical or structural engineer, and they will just add their services in that shell. Right, same as I explained with the mechanical engineers, they'll also add the aircon, fire, and different other services they will add in that shell and create the the specific aircon and fire and other piping information. Right, water as well. Right, structural engineers will do the same. They'll take the architectural design model, see if it can, or create their own, see if it can take the loads that is placed on it, maybe export it to a analysis software like Robot to analyze the strength and the loads and see if your building will fail or not. Right. Okay. So some of the examples I just highlighted there, but basically Revit is used in the building industry by the architects, engineers, and so on. All right. Okay, now we delve down to the two softwares. All right, basically, Revit and Revit LT uses the same core of the software. There are a lot of differences, and how it's sold is that Revit LT is sold in a suite, basically, so you can't buy it separately. It comes with an AutoCAD LT in that suite, and it's seen as a drafting or a kind of a startup tool, but you can take it and use it with any kind of environment. We'll basically look at which environments it suits and which environments it doesn't suit, but we'll look at that a little bit later. Right, obviously Revit is a full solution. You can buy it as a separate software subscription. You can also purchase it in an ASE collection, basically with 20 odd other softwares included. One of them is AutoCAD, others are Robot, and that sort of thing. All right. The main differences between the two, obviously there's a big price difference, but what we're going to focus on is that we're going to just look at what's not in Revit LT and the considerations that you need to just make when you look at the two softwares. Right, so the first one normally is talked about is the rendering that's not inside Revit LT. Right, the in-product rendering, meaning that if you've got the 3D model and you click the render button, there isn't any internal rendering system. Now, if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, there is three little images. Top left is a hidden line or just a basic black and white image. Then the middle one is a shaded view. Perhaps it's or you can even say that it's a realistic view, meaning that it's just switched to a realistic mode, and then the bottom one on the right is a rendered view. Now that bottom right one isn't included in that functionality isn't included in the Revit LT, but the other two is. Right. In saying that, obviously most architects and engineers would like to present their model, but you do have in the LT version 2 of the 3 that you do have to present your model. However, in the LT you do have the ability to upload your Revit model to the cloud for cloud rendering purposes, meaning that you can still produce that third little image, but it's not local. It's been uploaded. Your model's been uploaded to the cloud, and it gets rendered in on the Autodesk Cloud service. Right, or servers. Right, and then once it's done, you get an email back saying that your rendering is finished, and you can just visit the website and either download or re-render. Right, it does cost cloud credits. It's cloud credits is a monetary Autodesk monetary system. So some of them, the higher end renderings do cost cloud credits. The draft and the mid-range ones do not. However, the cloud credits you can additionally purchase if you do a lot of renderings. It's typically $100 for 100 cloud credits, plus minus. All right. Okay. So basically, the rendering on your PC isn't included, but there are other ways to workarounds, as we call it. Right. Carrying on with also another difference in the Revit LT, there's no Worksets, which means that you don't have an ability to have a central model and 2 or 3 users working on that central model to create or to break up the model into parts for each user to use. That also carries over to the BIM 360 idea. So where you normally, if you use the Worksets in the cloud or the BIM 360 idea with the design options, or not design options, but the design BIM 360 design, you can share your model with other stakeholders on the cloud. Now, also, so that's not included. So it's typically used in silo on your own as a single user. However, you can link Revit files together with Revit LT. So you can simulate that sort of thing where you have different parts. Each user uses a different part of them or creates a different part of the model, and at the end you just link them all together. Also, you can also upload with your normal non-workset model. You can upload to the 360 environment, obviously, so as to link to the other stakeholders with Revit LT. However, it's not worksetable, or it's not a workset file that you upload. It's just they call it a cloud model, right? Single model that you upload, right, to be used with the other stakeholders. All right, so there is kind of also a workaround, but as you see there, all the functionality isn't in Revit LT with regards to worksets and sharing your model. All right, then the next one is in-place models. Now, there is one in-place model. Now, what an in-place model is, it's basically a unique item that you would model in context of the rest of the components. See, if you look on the desk on the right-hand side of the image there, that desk fits between or around the column. Now, that's a nice example of how the desk fits into the context of the model. Now, that sort of functionality isn't in the Revit LT, meaning that you need to then create this a desk as a family externally in the family editor, and then load it in and place it around the column. Right, so the workflow is a little bit longer, but it can be done at a little bit more harder because you don't have the context that you design your components around. So it could be a little bit take a longer that to create these unique items. All right. So yes, it's basically ease of use. So you lose that little bit of functionality. Right. There is one in-place family, and that's walls, where you can create odd-shaped walls, that sort of thing, as an in-place family. Right. In saying that, you might create the desk as a in the wall category, and just give it a different name or so, that sort of thing. However, if you do reports at the end or schedules, that desk will appear in the wall schedule, and that's maybe not what you want, but it's just another option. All right, going through to the additional things that's not included in Revit LT. Some of the structural and MEP tools aren't. There are more structural information or tools in Revit LT than there are MEP. The MEP creation tools are not there, so a lot of them have been removed. There are some structural tools, like as you can see the little images of the ribbon. The top one is the Revit LT. There is some structure beams and columns and braces and foundations and that sort of thing. Right. However, there's no connections, steel connections. There's no rebar that you would see in the bottom ribbon image or screenshot. Right. So MEP guys, it's you can't use the MEP tools. However, you can insert any component. You can use the drafting tools. You can you can use a lot of line-based items. So if you do want to indicate switches and circuits and that sort of thing, just with drafting tools, you could. However, it's it's just a drafting exercise, like think of AutoCAD drafting. Right. With the structural, you have a couple of structural tools that you can use, and a lot of guys, structural engineers, actually use Revit LT to create their components from start to finish, using beams and a series of beams to create their trusses. Putting them all together, creating a group, and then copying that group along to create the roof structure. Right, that sort of thing. So structural engineers do use Revit LT successfully, and yeah, that. But obviously, just note that structure and MEP tools are missing. Right, and then lastly, the third-party apps that are restricted in Revit LT. So if you, as you know, Revit and AutoCAD and all the Autodesk software have apps that you can download and install, like your phone would have apps. So does Revit and AutoCAD and that sort of thing, where you can increase your productivity by downloading and installing a third-party app. Now, that functionality isn't built into LT. As a matter of fact, also the same applies to AutoCAD LT versus AutoCAD. The LT versions don't have that ability. All right, so just an example, if you're working with Lumion as a rendering software, you can use Revit LT with it. However, the Live Sync third-party app can't be installed on Revit LT because of the third-party limitation. However, you can export your Revit model or Revit LT model to a DWG and then import it into Lumion. However, there is some materials that don't come through, but you can solve that in a different way using Lumion material sets by assigning and loading, or setting and loading those material sets to be more productive applying materials in Lumion. Okay, right. So that concludes all the main difference. There are a couple, or there are other differences that's noteworthy, but not the main ones. Like I don't think there's decals. The decals are missing in Revit LT, and a couple of other smaller items. All right. So how would you position the two softwares in your company? And obviously, you can't just go out and purchase it to. You have to kind of look at all the ideas and things. If you are a smaller company or a single user, Revit could work, especially if you're starting up, because the cost is very much lower than the full Revit. So you can get into it, you can learn the software and grow with the software, and then maybe at a later stage you can move over to the full version once you're skilled enough, and then you can grow into that main environment. Right, so for a single company or single user, Revit LT could be used successfully. All right, and then grow with the software into a kind of a larger buildings, more functionality, and that sort of thing. Right. Okay, and then if you have an office that's multi-user, that's got multi-users, maybe there's a couple of architects, a couple of draftsmen, that sort of thing, Revit LT could also fit with a mix of full versions. A lot of our companies are working in that manner, where they have a couple of full versions that does certain tasks and a couple of Revit LTs to kind of do the drafting side of the models. Right. So as I mentioned, Revit LT in that sort of environment would suit, the draftsman, where they create door and window schedules in the architectural environment, add dimensions, text, and that sort of thing, where they just do some 2D drafting using the LT tools. And then the full guys, they do the guys that use Revit, the full version, they would perhaps do the modeling, the presentation, a little bit of rendering, sun studies, that sort of thing. And obviously with the MEP and structure, they would create the actual components and then pass it over to the Revit LT person, and you will carry on with that same model using the drafting tools. Right. In saying that, if you can open the same Revit file with either Revit LT or Revit, they're interchangeable, so there's no problem with that. However, say if you're working and you're opening a Revit MEP model that's got MEP components like ducts and that sort of thing, you can't go and manage and edit them in the LT because there's no functionality to do that with. Right. You can obviously pick up those points to dimension them or to tag them and that sort of thing. All right. Then looking at the benefits, just briefly, the benefits between the two software, obviously, Revit is a good entry-level software. It's budget-friendly. It's a good drafting tool. And you get AutoCAD LT in that little suite or package that you purchase. So it's a very handy starting tool. Remember that it's just limited with the BIM 360 environment, but I guess that comes later when you've grown into the software and then you can go over to the full version, perhaps purchase additional BIM 360 tools to open a different market. Obviously, then Revit, it's the full solution. You've got all the functionality between and in all the industries, and you obviously have scope to grow within the sharing of the information to connected BIM, that sort of thing. However, you don't have any AutoCAD because it can be purchased as a single product, or if you need AutoCAD, then you need to consider AEC collection that includes a lot of the other softwares as well. Right, and then just looking at an example, just as just to kind of put everything together. So there's a company that's got two users. One is an architect, one is a draftsperson or architectural technologists. All right, so the solutions could be, that you can have one LT and only, or you can have two AEC collections, and it all depends on the tasks and the functionality of each of those users. So you just need to look at your company and your own tasks and usages, and once you've asked a couple of questions, you can decide on what route to take. We'll also obviously assist you in that process. We've obviously got lots of experience with this, and so you're welcome to ask those questions to yourself, and then just see how it would affect it. Now, if we'll go through the couple of the questions. All right, so one of the questions is what is your current workflow? And then so just to assess what you're currently doing, is AutoCAD in your workflow? Because that will impact either if you need the full version of AutoCAD or just get away with the LT version. Do you need all the features as we discussed earlier with Revit? If so, yes, then both those users would need the full version. And then perhaps the AEC collection if you also need AutoCAD. All right, and then are you doing rendering? Are you going to export it? Are you going to use something like V-Ray for Revit? Because that's a third-party app. If so, then you obviously need the full version of Revit, because that V-Ray would, as a third-party app, link to Revit. Obviously, it can't do it can't be linked to the Revit LT, you know. And are you going to export your or link externally with other stakeholders via BIM 360? You know, so that that'll also require maybe a decision to be made towards you know, the full version of Revit. Okay, so a lot of these questions, if you're unsure, obviously, as I mentioned, you're welcome to contact us, and we'll be able to assist you through that process. Right, just as you can see there on the right hand side, we are resellers of Lumion and a lot of Autodesk products. If you do want to ask us questions or on this process and that sort of thing, you're welcome to contact us. Our website is www.mgfx.co.za. All right, so thank you for watching, and we will contact and see you again in the next webinar. Thank you. Have a good day.